thanks a lot for sticking around for the policy debate. We hope that this will be this will be perhaps a bit less demanding in terms of intellectual effort than the papers we've seen. Although, that's not to say that we are that we are reducing the degree of intellectual stimulation. And so we are extremely glad to have for this debate four extremely distinguished participants. So we have Dominic Rohner, who needs no introduction. We have Akiko Suwa-Eisenmann, who's the chair of the high-level panel of experts of the Committee on World Food Security. There is Adnan Khan, who's the chief economist of FCDO, and there's Cushla Thompson, who's the senior lead on fragility and violence at OECD. And so the goal of the debate today is to essentially think about what the link is between or kind of how we can boost the policy relevance of economic research on conflict. And I think we will start this debate by just doing a quick kind of introduction of each of the participants. And I think it would be great if you could just explain very briefly to the audience how you see in your work the interaction between research and policy. And perhaps we should start with Dominic.
Yeah. What a good start. Can you hear me? Does it work? Yeah. Yeah. No. So I think I mean one of the participants to ReCIPE, Elena Esposito, who cannot be here today. So what she told me is that, well, when scholars get the midlife crisis around 40, 45, either they try to win the Nobel Prize by publishing the most top 5 possible, or they try to make a lot of money, or then they try to make a difference in the world by shaping policy. And I think most of us have chosen some combination of 1 and 3, right? Maybe mostly 3. And so in that sense, this ReCIPE is kind of the, our opportunity to finally have an impact. So we've studied conflict maybe for 10 years, 20 years, and we have, and many of the things actually are kind of solid and they work. I mean, to pick an example of one thing that, with Mathieu Coutenier and Nicolas Bergman and Matthias Tönig, we have this paper, This Mine is Mine, and there some of the results, for example, on traceability, that traceability can make a difference in the mining sector. Now there has been a lot of work that is going a bit in the same direction, but with more with newer and more fine-grained data, for example, on the Kimberley Protocol, etc., and they find something very similar. So I think that there is a reasonable body of evidence saying that, well, a transparency in mining, for example, can make traceability, can make a really big difference. And so this is something where many people in the room will know about it, will be maybe convinced by it, and policy makers very often would completely ignore it. There would be the communication between what we find in academia and what policy makers then actually do, if they are well intended. The ones who are not well intended, well, that's another story, right? But the ones who are well intended, very often they don't know which things are evidence based in terms of effectiveness, and so there, I think we can really play a big role, and so I'm very, very, as I was saying at the beginning, we're really grateful for FCDO to fund this, and I think it's a tremendous opportunity. So maybe
you can pass it.
Yes, Okay. Okay. So I'm Akiko Suwa-Eisenmann. I'm the exception in the room because I'm not working on conflict for my research. I'm working on trade in developing countries. So why I'm here? Because Oliver is a wonderful colleague, and second, also because I'm chairing this this group of experts with a strange name, high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition. So you can think of it as a very small IPCC for food security and nutrition. We present evidence-based research. We don't do research, new research, but we present evidence-based research that you are doing on to the CFS, to the UN Committee on World Food Security, which is based at the FAO, and which includes all the member states of the UN, plus philanthropy, plus multi-UN agencies, plus civil society and private sector. And the CFS is doing the hard work of negotiating policy recommendation, voluntary guidelines, non-binding, but people know that it exists. And they do the hard work. What we need to do as a science and policy interface is to be completely independent, completely legitimate, and no conflict of interest, and try really to provide this kind of evidence. And the evidence which explains my presence here is that last year we have written a report on the long-term impact of conflict.
Hi everyone, so thank you for inviting me. First of all, huge thanks on behalf of FCDO, CEPR, and the organizers for not just this conference, but for setting up this program, which is very eagerly anticipated and supported by FCDO. There are many of us in the audience, so Andy, Juan, Pablo are here. We're all here to support it and hopefully to see it becoming more effective and more effective. And shape policy both globally but also in UK and other places. So my background is I used to be a policymaker in a developing country context, dealing with both the consequences of conflict, hopefully not contributing to it, but also grappling with the questions of poverty, conflict, underdevelopment, and then spent a lot of years in the research world, both trying to understand those questions, do research on those questions, but also connecting other researchers to policy questions, both on conflict but also on underdevelopment in Asia and Africa through IGC. And in my current role at FCDO, trying to promote more of an environment at this. But one way of thinking about this was in my first life, I was now that I look back, I see questions that we should have been asking. Why were we not asking those questions? Questions where research evidence, data, and analysis could have helped us. And why was there no ecosystem for doing that? And we often talk about policy demand, but also demand often doesn't explicitly address itself. So how do we think of need also? So something that I'm also experiencing in my current work in a bureaucracy, although in a very different context, in a developed country bureaucracy, very similar tensions also exist. And it's not that if you think of the ecosystem, if the environment is such that if the question is, how do we create system where good evidence is produced in steady state influences policy and generates the demand for more evidence, data, and analysis. So in other words, policy influencing is endogenous to the production of evidence. That doesn't often happen in developed country context also. So in fact, my work in different countries shows that it perhaps happen more often in developing countries than fragile and conflict affected states because there's more need. And yes, there is maybe not just champions, a few individuals who want to do this, and sometimes there's a coalition of them. The deeper question is, how do we build more of that ecosystem there where that engages with people people in this audience and more people like that. Let me stop here, otherwise I'll keep on going.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Cushla Thompson from the Crisis, Conflict and Fragility Unit of the OECD. Thank you very much for having me here today as well. So Oliver mentioned one of our, or indeed our flagship publication earlier, which is the States of Fragility. There's two major things you may have heard of from sort of our team and what we do in the OECD. One is the States of Fragility, which is actually being launched next week, the States of Fragility 2025, so mark your diaries, look out for that. That uses a multidimensional framework to understand and interpret different sources of fragility across the world. We look at we use quite a data-intensive process. We look at 177 countries. That's how many which we've assessed we have sufficient data for. And we try to think about how the different dimensions of fragility feed into one another and what some of the policy responses can be. We have a whole range beyond that big flagship report. We have a whole range of research, applied policy research that we use to support our membership, which is basically the members of the OECD, the members of the Development Assistance Committee in particular, and the International Network on Conflict and Fragility, which is a network of policymakers, including the DAC members, but also including a lot of the major economic institutions that you'll be familiar with, the development banks, the IMF, many of the UN agencies, for example. So that's, in my current job, that's what I do. My personal role within that, I'm an economist and a political scientist by background. I come from a treasury background, so I come from sort of the economic fiscal policy making within a developed country context to reflect on what you've just said. And I try and bring some of those insights and also experience, of course, working with and in fragile contexts and some of the challenges that they have to bear within the OECD. The OECD generally is not, as an organisation, exclusively focused on fragility and conflict, of course. We're much more focused as an organisation on the immediate needs of our members, on the advanced economies, and on some of these more, let's say, traditional economic policy issues, taxation, fiscal policy, trade, for example. So I think there's for us, there's really interesting interactions there about not just, yes, the conflict research, yes, the fragility research, but also some of those more traditional economic policy and how that can impact on fragility and conflict as well.
Okay, thank you very much for those introductions. I think like as a first kind of like framing question to start the discussion, I think I would like to kind of like talk about the thematic focus of conflict research and the extent to which it actually responds to the needs of the policy community. Much of what we are doing today is in some sense like, you know, providing guidance and setting an agenda for the research that ReCIPE is going to be doing in the next 4 years. And so you've all been exposed to these like presentations of the state of the literature, our personal like, you know, suggestions of like what we think is lacking. I would find it like incredibly interesting to know from your perspective, and I think I'm excluding Dominic from this discussion because he has the same like academic biases as me. But I think for like, you know, the other three are closer to policy making in some sense. I think I would find it like incredibly useful to get a sense of like what you think are areas that are currently under researched in our like academic community of economists and political scientists working on conflict. And so perhaps Akiko, you want to take the lead on this?
So I will be talking about conflict through the lens of food security. It's really and as you know, conflict is a major driver of acute food crisis today of 135 million of people in 20 countries. And what is really striking is the speed, how fast people enter food insecurity and food crisis when a conflict happens. But of course, conflict comes, and you know that very well, on top of other shocks, economic shocks or extreme climate shocks. And it also exacerbates existing inequalities, vulnerable groups, women, children, very small children, disabled people, and very often all these countries has already a lot of displaced people. And so in this context, we know that food is used as a weapon of war, and targeting not only production but also markets, storage, and people distributing food aid, starting with humanitarian workers. So I think that what first we have a responsibility as a citizen and member of international community. We have all this to make the link with the people working on law, because there are legal instruments which prohibit the use of food as a weapon, which protects his civilian in times of war and displaced person. All this law exists, signed by all the UN member states, and they are not implemented. And second, we have to reconstruct, but reconstruct not only production again, but also all the food systems. And here, what is important is, resilience, bouncing back, bouncing forward. We want all these countries, many of these countries were already food insecure before conflict happened. So we don't want to reconstruct as it was, because we want to reconstruct better, and better means more sustainable in terms of environment, but also maybe more nutrient-dense food systems. Not only cereals, but also nutrient-dense food, beans, vegetables, legumes, fruit, all these things which are makes for food system transformation and also a healthier planet. And we know also that conflict begets conflict, famine begets famine. So we need prevention. We need early warning system. And here, we have this disappearance or disruption of a major donor, the US. The US was providing this early famine warning system in Africa, FuseNet. The US was providing access to data, DHS, demographic health surveys. There were and nutrition. They were providing, and they had the ability to intervene both on humanitarian short-term intervention and also on long-term development projects. So this is something that we really need to be aware.
I think it's interesting you kind of already talked about what is in some sense the elephant in the room. I mean, like the figurative element. We had real elephants earlier, but there is indeed this special context where development aid seems to be under threat, and many countries are reducing its levels of aid, and I think we'll be coming back towards the end of the debate to what how as researchers we can kind of optimize our efforts in that environment. So that's a debate we will hopefully get back to towards the end. I think like on the thematic focus, perhaps I want to shift to Adnan. Like what from your perspective are like the key priorities for conflict research?
Yeah, from like not just mine, like maybe from FCDO perspective, we see this program and similar programs as a global public good for addressing market failures in the market for policy relevant knowledge on conflict prevention, on fragility, reducing fragility. And so this is not just about like, this is a group of economics of conflict, but our goal is also to help shape this group into answering the questions using the toolkits that you have in a rigorous way. On questions of how do you address conflict, but broader fragility. Also the links to growth and development, investment, not just in terms of like what is the impact of conflict on not having investment and others, but also in the other way. And what kind of like pathway exists to get out of the fragility trap, conflict trap, even in the presence of some degree of conflict. What kind of development interventions are possible from the outside, by the side of donors? This is a very, very live debate in the UK right now. In fact, this morning I skipped a session because we were participating in a discussion on how do we identify, prioritize countries for conflict-affected countries for UK to prioritize our development interventions, and what can be done there. So exactly the question that that we're having here. Again, it's not just it's donor perspective. I think a key perspective for any group is how do you work with policy actors and maybe private sector also in fragile conflict-affected states in helping build more effective states and helping them coming out of poverty, fragility, and driving more investment, and ultimately having a pathway, carving a pathway for sustained growth and development.
Cushla, if you can.
Sure. I mean, under research, I think I could probably write a very long wish list and email it to you if you'd like. But
yeah, we've already had some discussions.
We already had some discussions on that. Just a couple of reflections. Given this is the sort of policy relevant panel, I think one of the significant challenges on this side, and this isn't actually a comment on recent developments so much as it's a comment on things that have been a challenge for a long time and may just be sharpening up in terms of how challenging they are, and that's prioritization in terms of interventions. And by interventions I mean yes, donor interventions, so what does your expenditure go to, and when and how, and what's humanitarian and what's development, and what aspects of each of those. But also interventions and partnerships beyond aid. So things like trading relationships, investment relationships. How do you think about your broader set of policy tools and how they relate and when they can kick in? I think one interesting question that we have started to be asked, and we're sort of obviously thinking about more, is those economic partnerships. If that's a question, how do you foster and how do you develop economic partnerships, and what do they look like for countries that might still be in fragility, in some cases even experiencing conflict? And I think that's also very relevant because for us, certainly for our framework, it's been a couple of years now since the majority of the contexts and countries that experience high levels of fragility are actually middle income rather than low income. So there's some interesting policy questions there as well. One of the other things that I think would be really interesting in terms of the research agenda is exactly some of those questions around the role of the private sector. From my reflection from the policy side is that it's very easy to be seen as either, you're out with your sort of cheerleading pom-poms supporting the private sector and they can do no wrong, or you're a naysayer and you're very focused on grant financing and it's all about need and you're on that side of the fence. I don't think either of those are true. I think there's an important middle ground. And there's a serious role for academic research in helping us to understand when and how is that role and what could that look like. And equally on the side of some of the macro level interventions as well. What does that opportunity set look like? What do those tools look like? And what are some examples of when they've worked well?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Like also the fact that you kind of highlighted the role of the private sector. This is actually like a theme that when we were in the early stages of designing ReCIPE was not really on top of our agenda, but it's like, through conversations with FCDO, it turned out that from their perspective, this was also like a key area where they wanted more evidence, which is exactly why we created a theme around private investment. And we had like a wonderful presentation by Michael and Uwe on the work they're planning to do in that area. I think this is incredibly useful and also helpful, for some of us to think how we can work some of these issues in what we are doing. I think that food security is at the background of like many of the themes that we talked about, but it's almost like a transversal theme to the extent that it's like, we didn't dedicate a separate theme to it, but it's definitely something that's relevant like for various sub themes, and it's probably something we may want to kind of make a bit more explicit in our further efforts. One question that I think is that Dominic and I have been kind of struggling a bit with, and this was also reflected in the presentation I gave right before the break, is that as researchers on conflict, we often find it hard to to think about the external validity of our work. I think we have the kind of the intuition as an academic to be very, very modest and careful, and take findings as insightful about the context that we are studying. But obviously, if we want our work to be policy relevant, it needs to speak to situations that are not historical situations, even if we're talking about the same country that we have studied in our academic work. And I think I would find it very very interesting to hear from you how you think about that challenge of overcoming external validity challenges in conflict research, and what we can do as researchers to help to bridge that gap between the academic work that we do and the applications that policymakers are interested in. I'm not sure if one of you wants to take the lead on this. Adnan? I think this one. Yeah.
Should I go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'd start by saying, don't worry about this. So for me, external validity will not be a good starting point. Not that I don't care about external validity. I know from your perspective as directors like you. But that's not a good starting point. I think when it comes to research on fragile and conflict-affected states, my first goal would be the thing that I'll worry most about is do no harm, and ideally do something which is locally useful. That requires understanding the context, working with policy actors, building relationships of trust, building longer-term relationships, and doing something which is useful in the local context. The next stage would be to do something which is locally valid, like a local validity. And ultimately, yes, this will pave path for doing something which also has external validity. So it's not caring about external validity, but it's more about the pathway. So to give example from my own work, with Ben, Asim, and other Oriana and others, we did. So for the first couple of years, we've worked with governments and either tax authority, procurement authorities, or other authorities. We didn't behave like a hammer looking for a nail. We have research ideas. Yeah, you need to implement this. This is your problem. So we try to understand the context, the local institutional context, the constraints that they were under, look at data, but also like a lot of multidisciplinary and other type of work also in terms of understanding. So spent years doing that. Was very useful, helped us build very strong relationships also. So some of them relationships continue even after 15 years. So like, I think the returns, yes, the investment was quite big, but the returns are also very high because it didn't lead to just one project. They have led to one project after another. And I think inbuilt into the process is also, once you build those relationships, you can also look into the challenges that they face. And I think the challenge for all of us is also then coming up with something which addresses their challenges, but which is also addresses the frontiers of knowledge, extending the frontiers of knowledge. Eventually, it did result in something like that they valued, but that also was publishable in good journals.
So, if I may, I think I completely agree. I think that external validity really matters at least matter on a research. But for policymakers, my experience is, and I'm working for policymakers which are supposed to frame a global framework. So, but they are really they are really interested by examples, mechanism, and they are also really interested by success and failure. And these are often missing in a research paper. And also this also means that an evidence-based informed policy making needs a very independent group of experts, because we must be able to name and shame countries or examples which failed. And so we need this to be completely independent, and we know that policymakers really appreciate this detailed story, because, for instance, last year, HLPE report was on urban food systems, and we said a city, urban area, you have primary city, secondary city, with a lot of budget, no budget, with a lot of, you name it, you have so many diversity. But in this diversity, these are the examples that we can take, and then please, policymakers and other stakeholders, please frame your own policy actions. And they were very interested, and now I think that they are all negotiating this guideline. So, and also I think that researchers. We are also working many often on poverty, inequality. So we are working on groups which are not represented at the political level, and this is also something important.
Cushla, you want to add something?
Yeah, just very briefly, which is to say, to support some of the comments here around what I would term second best policy advice and the importance of that. And by that I don't mean it's not good policy advice. I mean, policymakers are not a block. They also have a plethora of different interests and perspectives and objectives and backgrounds, etc. And so, and they're trying to optimize across 4,000 different variables, right? So in most cases, the least useful research is one that says, oh, this country is heavily indebted, therefore you must undergo you must adjust fiscally, you must, reduce your expenditure. I'm taking a very simplistic example, but you do see sort of research of this vein a lot, and to a degree, if it's in an area where there is less weight of evidence already, okay, that can be useful to a degree, but most of the time, what you actually need is to see an understanding of okay, how do you get there? What is your next best policy advice? How do you work with the local context to actually make a positive difference? So just to flag that most policymakers, most of the time, are not working in academic perfection land. They're working in deeply imperfect environments, and so second best is very important.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is that, like in like Adnan, like very explicitly like mentioned qualitative work, and Akiko, like in your answer as well, like you were like also like talking about this description of like what happened in cases, and I think that kind of brings me naturally to another topic I was very keen to talk about, which is one of disciplinary boundaries, because like ReCIPE is a program that takes a particular focus in terms of like methodological approach, because it's bringing kind of it's evidence based. It's based on data like statistical methods. And it's in some sense what makes this program so unique and powerful. But of course, the policymakers are not bound by disciplinary boundaries. And so I think it would be interesting, from your perspective, to hear how you think we should complement our work with the work of other disciplines. And if you think that this is something we should do as academic economists ourselves, or whether this is something that's more effective at the policy level, or at some intermediate stage between the research we do and the way it is consumed by policymakers.
I'm happy to start. So I think multidisciplinary work and high quality, qualitative work, is really critical, especially in a field like conflict and fragility, where we do need insights from different disciplines to be able to do good quality work and to be enriching. Doesn't mean doing bad quality work, which is not publishable, so a little bit of mishmash of every discipline, which doesn't generate any insight. So I see it more as a challenge function between different disciplines, more as a creative encounter where we throw evidence and questions past each other, learn from each other, and then enrich each other's conversation. But also in some part of call it an aggregation function, where the insights from different disciplines come and together in terms of guiding, or at least shaping or influencing policy choices or our understanding of an issue. I also still think that that doesn't mean giving up on the rigor of especially economics, but enriching it around the boundaries and in the middle with these creative encounters. That also means maybe working with policy actors in terms of their maybe enabling them, supporting them in being better customers, better users, better commissioners of different types of analysis. So if you're asking a very quantitative question, so then economics is perhaps the right toolkit. What is the impact of X on Y? But if you're asking a very different type of question, so maybe anthropological or other disciplines are better suited for those intersectionality and many other questions. In other words, thinking of policy actors and their roles in terms of better engagers with evidence, or better users, commissioners, in all of those senses.
Sure, thank you. I think one reflection I would have is, yes, the interdisciplinary nature of it. We in our team, for example, I have a economics public policy background. I have a colleague who has a military background. I have a colleague who has a humanitarian background, and so on and so forth. And I do strongly believe it makes the work richer and more effective. It is also true that there's been many lunches and coffees where I've sat with my military background colleague and we've tried to figure out what each other was saying and realized we were saying the same thing but using very different language. And I think a lot in practice, I'll give you an example. In practice, when you have a security force, for example, that is providing security services, they might be enabling local markets through the very fact of their presence. There's a whole lot, they might be digging wells, that's public infrastructure for the community. They're actually doing a lot of economic activities. They may never actually have any kind of strategy or any kind of thinking beyond the sort of immediate, what is their strategic goals as a defense apparatus from what they're doing. I think there's huge value in having those conversations. They can be quite challenging sometimes, especially with that community, because there is some very good kind of sensitivities about that, very good reasons for those sensitivities. But I also think they're very, very important to have, because sometimes that may be the only community that is able to have access to a place. You know, we talk about our interventions. Well, if you're not can't actually be there, then there's not much you can actually do. Sometimes it's humanitarian actors and sometimes it's defence actors who are actually on the ground in those places. So, you know, I think that's a necessary conversation. I think some of that is going to take time to have those relationships build. I think, you know, in the policy and in the practical area, the academic arena is a great place for some of that to start. And some of that is about how we try and, you know, use language that the other side understands, that, and they, you know, to sort of bridge that gap in the conversation.
So I completely agree that, I know, it's this one. Do you hear me better?
Maybe not.
No, okay. So the group of experts, the HLPE, is completely, okay.
Okay, sorry. We have so many.
We have so many choice. So the group of experts, the HLPE, is multidisciplinary. We have economists, geographers, agronomists, nutritionists, and law experts. And this is really important because food security, you have understood, food security for us it's not just about the lack of food, it's political process. It's about agency, it's about people being able to decide what they eat and how they produce. And this is even more important in a conflict affected area. So we try, in this evidence-based, is not only quantitative, we try to incorporate the lived experience of small farmers or of indigenous peoples. But this is very important. We need to have good quality evidence-based, and so this means also to be very rigorous in terms of screening the type of information we have. But it's true also that when we are macroeconomists, we go to the field, we do a lot of qualitative surveys, and this is also something that needs to be also pushed forward and better known by policymakers, and not only the star-studded table that we published at the end.
So I can say something about this with respect to ReCIPE, because when we set this up, we were very. So that was one of the key questions of the interdisciplinary nature, and it's true that I'm quite happy with that respect. So we have several political scientists on board as well, so not just economists. And then even the economists who we have, I can show, let me showcase maybe Owen McGurk's work, for example. So well, he is an economist, but his work that you do, for example, with Nathan or other quarters is very much inspired by ethnological research. So you're kind of, I'm sure that if you were to teach a course on ethnology, you would get away with teaching a really good course, right? and so it's true that it's really impressive and inspiring how, for example, Owen can kind of go beyond economics and integrate these insights. Or, for example, another theme leader who's unfortunately not around at the moment today, Salma Moussa, for example. So she's a political scientist, and she's very much applying deep insights from psychology. So she does RCTs where she would test the contact hypothesis, for example, where psychologists came up with. Or, for example, Saumitra, where is Well, Som is somewhere here as well, and Som, for example, he would he's a political scientist, but with a big focus on history. So many of the things, explained to me that half of his holidays he goes to places that feature his papers. There's a paper on the Battle of Verdun. Som spends his holidays in Verdun to see, whether his paper is accurate. So in that sense, and Felipe Valencia is kind of in a similar vein sitting here, right? So in that sense, I sense that in economics we're, at least this crowd here in the room, we're much more trying to engage and go beyond. I mean, we still, of course, as you were saying, we care a lot about rigor, about biases, about all kinds of things that could be confounders, but we try to reach out as much as we can to be as inclusive as possible.
Yeah, and I'll continue on that slightly self-congratulatory note, but just to highlight that FCDO also encouraged us to reach out to kind of in some sense partner programs that they fund in different disciplines, and so we have representatives of some of these programs here. So there is a Mette, Julien and Tonya, and so I definitely encourage you to go and talk to them about the research we are doing. Okay, I think actually the time passed relatively quickly, so I'm quite keen to actually open for some questions of the audience, if there are any.
Hi everyone. My name is Oyebola Okwogwe. I'm at the World Bank Research Department. I'm also a theme leader for ReCIPE. And my question is something Adnan touched on early, and people have also mentioned in one way or the other about how do you build an ecosystem for policy research in country. I mean, you have shown in some sense what that looks like, but not every country is going to have an Adnan who sits in the middle of being of being like a ex-policymaker that has all of those connections, and then also in the academic world. Because I feel that this is really what many of us are hoping for, but it's not really clear how you achieve that when you don't have, or you don't know who these kind of key players are going to be. And we think also about the research capacity in countries, because I think at the end of the day, both also due to some of these multidisciplinary issues, we really need people who are deeply embedded in context to be part of this policy, this whole ecosystem. And I think right now there are two worlds that don't always talk to each other. So just love to hear more insights. Thank you.
This sounded like a question to Adnan, no?
Yeah, building such an ecosystem is not easy, as we all know. And so for all the work that we did, it wasn't that we changed the ecosystem. So yes, we tried to create it. I think one lesson for ReCIPE and others is also there is huge heterogeneity in the policy makers in terms of their type, their incentives and constraints. How do we identify the right types and engage with them, understanding their constraints and their incentives, and build relationships, not just with one person, ideally build a coalition of interest that outlies the frequent change of turnover of policy makers. In my work, we have been able to do with lot of effort in some cases, with some where honest admission, I have not succeeded. Our work of our type has not gone very far, is going beyond individuals and creating broader ecosystem where the entire organization or the entire system is conducive to more of this change. Because that's not just like what researchers could do, it's also like how the incentives and how the opening the internal black box of how governments work, and how do we engage with different parts of that. It's also like, I would say, like I was a policymaker in my former life. were I not recorded, and I don't want to be on YouTube, I would have told a story about like how my initial training came to haunt me much later, but like that's another story that
Okay, I think we can take more questions. If there, Hannes.
I was wondering to the people with policy experience how you feel about coordinating different organizations, but because from what I see is that there is a lot of like maybe the academics are not necessarily coordinated with the policymakers, but I feel less bad about that when I see how discoordinated the different policymakers are. So I was wondering, like, can academics help coordinate policymakers, or is this a complete pipe dream?
I think this sounds like a Cushla question, no?
So just, what do you mean by policymakers? Do you mean in a given country amongst the different like sort of ministries and so on?
Exactly. Take Haiti, like, I don't know, 5 different UN organizations on the ground, or like take IMF and UNDP, or take World Bank and UNDP. Yeah, so I think the a lot depends on the country, first of all. So I have seen some quite good examples of certain projects or certain programs sort of stepping in to have that coordination function de facto, but it kind of depends on the ecosystem they're stepping into, because even when you have government machinery where we think, oh, it's very, very low capacity, there's still an ecosystem there. There's not necessarily, a lot of those rules of how decisions are taken and how policies are formed, they won't necessarily be what's on paper. They'll be practices and so on. So it can be difficult for an outsider to sort of step in and play that role, even if they are anointed with that mandate, on paper. Where I have seen it work, it tends to be when there's a small community of, say, donors, ministries, and international organisations. They can they can get on the same page, and people are prepared to sort of follow the leader and use that as a mechanism. I think what is interesting is that in terms of how sort of some of the international organisations, for example, some of the international policymakers, or the donor community, how we might coordinate. I think there needs to be recognition that we're all on the same page. So there is some kind of, or can be some kind of research work or think piece work which is a little bit gotcha. There's a fine balance between holding to account, which is important, and let's recognise that we are all on the same page. We are ultimately trying to achieve the same thing, and sometimes decision makers are constrained in how they can go about doing that. So if there was going to be a sort of an academic sort of playing that role, then that's just one caution I would say, is that everyone has their own political economy, and it's more helpful sometimes to understand how you work within that political economy as opposed to necessarily pretending it doesn't exist. That's all.
Okay, so on coordinating with policymakers, it's something that HLPE have. It's something which is really important for the HLPE, because again we are working with a multilateral, so at the international level, and we hope that all the work that we is doing will trickle down to the local level. And for that, really, the private sector and the civil sector, the civil society, is really important, because they are in this CFS. They are participating in the negotiation, which is unique in the UN system, by the way. And then they say at the local level, at the national or local level, you know, remember you have agreed on these guidelines years before. Maybe you could try to implement them at a local level. So having this civil society working and private sector working also at different level is very important. And on the organization work and science and policy interface working on food security, there are a lot of them. The more so because of climate change, biodiversity decline. IPCC, IPBS is working on food security more and more. And so we are coordinating with them, talking with them. But I think that social scientists are very important in that context and will be more and more important because we believe in behavior. We believe in changing, that people can change behavior. And we believe in price, we believe in incentives. And this is really something that we put, which is a not comparative advantage, but something we put as an element in the whole pot of all these SPIs working on climate change.
So 10-second response from my side. Yes, I do believe academics have a role, call it focal point, evidence-based, honest broker. But if incentives matter, if incentives are not aligned for coordination, then in a game theoretic sense, like no matter we tell people to coordinate, nothing will happen. So we'll still be left in a suboptimal equilibrium.
I took 10 minutes, you took 10 seconds.
Oh, okay.
To make the point.
Are there other questions? Yes.
Hi, my name's Tanya Irwin. I'm at the University of Toronto. I have a question. Oh, first of all, I'm a political scientist, so I applaud the interdisciplinary efforts. I've been able to follow along pretty well today, which I think is a testament to the efforts. But one thing that's come up again, and it's come up in this conversation, and it's related to the first question, is about the importance of locally relevant and contextual, I suppose, responses and the way that we do our research. And it's a question maybe for Oliver and Dominic, but I'm also wondering how this resonates from your perspectives and your roles about the extent to which localization for the research is embedded into ReCIPE. And so there's funds available, for example, might come up tomorrow in the conversations, but for PhD scholars, but I wonder if there's an explicit localization strategy to engage Global South researchers and civil society actors that are on the ground to maybe make that bridge between these externally valid findings that are really robust and excellent with maybe people closer to the ground. So sort of related to the first question. But.
Yeah, Dominic, you want to answer?
Okay, so this buys you 2 minutes to come up with a better answer complement. But so let me start. It's fine. I offer you these 2 minutes. So in general, so the grant openings the call for proposals will start pretty soon, we are basically. So it is part from the FCDO the development aid program. So if now I want to study Switzerland, then maybe you're going to tell me, well, maybe Switzerland is not a good idea. It's maybe too rich as a country. So there are some there are some inclusion criteria of kind of being a good fit. But in principle, I would expect that many of the things that we're going to fund would be exactly this country, this region. So it's not that I think that would be my anticipation that among the applications, many would kind of focus on particular context. And it's true that so we also start this lecture series that will also start next month actually, where we have every 2 weeks another lecture by one of the theme leaders, and where we are very inclusive. So the idea is really we want that everybody, technical or non-technical, would be able to follow. So in that sense, the idea is again. So outreach is really important, and so maybe one of the things where you would have very big comparative advantage, Oliver, to talk about the outreach that we've done, because you have spoken to zillions of people in the last year, and so to kind of exactly be kind of the kind of exercise we're doing here, but very systematically and many times. So yeah.
Yeah, the zillions is a bit exaggerated, but I think there's part of, if I understood Tonja's question well, there's part of her question that I mean, you didn't really answer yet, which I'll try. I'll try to answer, which is I understood the question of localization to be also about the involvement of researchers based in lower income countries. And so this is something that's going to be very important for ReCIPE. We definitely have this in mind, and so I think the first call is opening up in a couple of weeks. I think in some sense, because one of the open questions for us is what kind of response we'll get on this topic, right? Because we don't have actually that many kind of existing programs that we can learn from. We can learn from our kind of older siblings, Pedal and Stag, but they're quite special because in some sense the topics they work on are also topics that researchers based in lower income countries are already very active on. Conflict is, especially from the lens that we take and our methodological approach, is less studied, I would say, today in kind of lower income countries. And I think part of what ReCIPE is trying to achieve, and that's this was the introduction of Dominic this morning. He was talking about the future Einstein based in a lower income country today. In some sense, this is exactly the type of capacity we want to build. The online courses play an important role in that, because that makes it should make it relatively easy for people to to understand what the state of the art is in our discipline. But we are very keenly waiting as well to see what the pool will be of applicants on this project in the first call. And I think based on that, I think we we definitely have in mind that we will try to refine our strategy. One of the things we have been kind of talking about, and this was also based on a discussion we had with the JPAL Humanitarian Protection Initiative, which is actually based in this building, and of which there may be some people in the room. One thing they have set up is a kind of almost a lab where there is some specific support to develop proposals for researchers based in kind of developing countries. And so this is something that we may want to do as well. But the short answer is that it's on the agenda, but it's something that we will kind of develop organically based on how the program evolves in the next couple of months.
I just wanted to add that from the perspective of the network that we work for, there is very high demand for thinking and research coming from the Global South, coming from countries in contexts of fragility, and partly that is to foster and grow the ecosystem, and partly that is to situate it in the felt experience and the understanding of context. So yeah, there's demand for the approach you're taking.
Yeah, thank you. Other questions? If not, I think I promised that we would reflect very briefly on the current state of development aid, and I understand that some of you may not necessarily be able to take part in that discussion, but perhaps Dominic, you want to reflect briefly on what we can do as researchers in the kind of development space today, in a context where the development aid seems to be becoming rarer, and there may be kind of constraints that didn't exist before may become more binding.
No, I guess, of course, you know, if there is a lower flow of aid, this makes it maybe even more important to have good evaluation of kind of, you know, setting priorities of what works best, what is most important. And so I guess the role for Scholar is even more crucial, because we can then help to allocate the lower aid flows in a way that's most beneficial for societies around the world. So, and I think, I mean, one thing that I really like in the approach that many people here in the room follow, and also FCDO, is this idea of being evidence-based. And I have, without naming and shaming names of other aid organizations with whom I had some contacts, and very often I talk to people who have very strong views on how the world works, but that are completely, you know, that have never been falsifiable in the proper sense of epistemology, right? So they have this dogma, they have this ideology, they have this view, but they've never confronted it with any qualitative or quantitative empirical test. While here, I think one thing that we all share, or most of us, I guess, in the room, is that we think that, well, you know, this idea that we want to be scientific and evidence-based and rigorous for the purpose of making the right decisions. And these decisions are very, you know, they can make huge differences in people's lives. So there is like, you know, we have a big responsibility. We don't want to mess with people's lives. So in that sense, I think that we can do something really useful. Yeah.
Anyone? You want to say something? Or?
I'm happy to say. So to the extent that aid is spent on things that are transformative, that address market failures, government failures, like market shaping interventions and others, yes, those cuts would be hurtful. More often than not, this is not the case. We need to think of development when aid is part of the problem. Aid is never a solution to development, as we know, and can more often than not be part of the problem. I think part of our energies in our of this group and others should be spent in how do we think of development and growth and development where local policy actors, local elites, national elites take ownership of their development, change policies, implement better policies, where better policies become better politics, which is again something that I very much hope that people in this group will opine on. Also in a world where whether it's private sector investment flows or others, there is broad-based productivity-led growth, economic growth, structural transformation. So much of that doesn't need it. In fact, yes, aid, if rightly spent, can be a contributor, can be a complement. It's not, or more than often than not, it is not the case. And now in today's world, the ODA in any case is a nano fraction of what the world needs if you just take a look. And those flows will never be possible unless the incentives in the countries are aligned towards better investment flows from outside. So it's going back to Bauer's paradox, of the 1970s.
Akiko,
Yes, just I agree on aid, but I think that as researchers we rely on data, public data, which is so we had this HLPE report on data where we said data is just like blood. We need it, and it's a public investment, and so. Of course, yes, countries can have other resources other than aid, but one of the things which we need to make evidence-based research is agricultural census, data which are nationally representative, which are long enough, not only private data which are taken for one opportunity and which disappear, or which are secret or expensive and we cannot have access to. So preserving this blood of research, which is public data in developing countries, if aid is for that, we need it.
Does this work? Yeah, sorry, it's just red, I wasn't sure. I obviously we don't actually, there's a lot we don't know. There's some things that we do know. I agree with the points around prioritization and understanding how to best use aid and how to use it as a support for better policies and all of that. I think one thing that's really going to be very interesting in the future is, if I think in my very simplistic way that this is a conversation about conflict and fragility is sort of nested within the economic discipline broadly, and I recognize you're being very cross-disciplinary. There's also the question of how do we think about some of those challenges in the sort of beating heart of the institutions, global institutions that are tasked with things like financial stability and macro stability or trade, or the sort of the rules of the game and the supports that they provide to countries and contexts and who are experiencing fragility. And I think that's a really interesting question. What we are seeing there is a huge growth in momentum and interest in thinking more creatively about how does trade interact with peace. How do you support? What's the role of the WTO? How do you support a context to trade their way into greater prosperity, which is something that we have seen in some regions of the world, and that has had an impact on fragility and, one would hope, eventually conflict in certain areas as well, both positive potentially and some negative interactions as well potentially. So how do we think about that stuff more effectively? I think that's going to be a really interesting set of questions, and a set of questions where, as I say, I'm only seeing more energy, not less. So I think it's not strictly a negative news story from my side.
Yeah. If we have a second. So we have a big expert on exactly this question in the room. I don't know if you, Hannes, if you feel like adding something, because right before during the coffee you told me about your fascinating work with the IMF on the macroeconomic side of kind of conflict prevention. So if I can maybe, it's a bit of an unorthodox approach of the panel discussion, but Hannes has a lot of exciting things to say about this, and so maybe if we can just, if you want the floor.
I was actually preparing in my head a question that was very provocative, so now I need to switch gears, but so I think that generally speaking, it's not really well understood kind of where the conflict work starts and where the development work stops. I think that's not clear to everybody, and I think this was my now just like going in exactly with this. I think at the so let me first finish this. So at the IMF, it's like a bunch of economists that are trained in technical assistance and macro and sound macro policies, and it's a very, very tiny group within the IMF. It's really, really tiny, that thinks about conflict, even though when you look at where the IMF is active, it's exactly at the brink of the conflict trap. So we track this kind of conflict trap with our data, and we can show that IMF programs are completely active exactly kind of before you fall in. So they should actually be the people who are, if you look at, for example, if you look at development aid, many of the things that we think are conflict active, they come in much later. So usually the world reacts to conflict. And of course, this is not me saying that the IMF is super preventative, but it's actually they're very active, but they probably don't know that they're active in a prevention scenario, right? And so there's these people that visit, I don't know, Pakistan, but they have in mind that they are visiting to fix the financial system, but they're not thinking of conflict in the moment they visit a country. this is our observation from the data. And I think this is also true for UNDP and other organizations. This was kind of what I hinted at with my question before on coordination. But let me also ask something provocative. I think this what I feel right now is that all the governments of the world are trying to kind of say that they are really only caring about their own people, and that this is really now you see the integration, right? FCDO is an example. You see the integration of the development arms into the foreign policy arms, because development is just another way to express your own interests, right? And then of course now comes in Trump and puts a turbo boost on this kind of thing, renaming regions of the world and so on, right? And I think that I'm very worried about is exactly this mix of where is it development and where is it your own country interest. This is going to be completely get out of the window, and everybody's just trying to grab natural resources, and it's a free for all. So I don't even know in this, where are we relevant in this space, right? I think that's also a very I don't know. It's a very sad kind of thought, but I think that's it's not clear to me with this new egotism that we have that many policymakers will keep carrying if it keeps going like this.
This is Dominic. It seems like you want to answer this provocative question.
My answer is very, very short. I think it's obviously an excellent question, but I think as scholars, the good thing about academia is academic freedom and the fact of being neutral and of being kind of objective and not paid by some industry to lobby for something. And so in that sense, we also have a role a bit of being critical, right? So if very, very often people, they kind of follow their interests and they disguise it as some kind of cheap chat, right? And so in some sense, one of the role I think that many social sciences are good at is to kind of critically call something bluff if it's bluff, right? If somebody says, "Oh, we do this for the purpose of that," and has a great speech about why this is good for the world, and then we can show that, well, it's not good for the world, it's just good for you who wants to be re-elected, then that's also a contribution in some sense, no? Because this demascation of hypocrisy. So in that sense, I think we have a role to play, no matter the context.